In the dense forests of northern Michigan, three shadows move through the moonlit night, their orange jumpsuits barely visible in the darkness. For them, the isolated farmhouse ahead represents freedom, a chance to resupply and disappear into the wilderness. What they don't know is that through the scope of a carefully positioned rifle, Jack Morrison is already watching their every move. After 15 years as a Navy SEAL sniper with over 200 confirmed kills, Morrison chose this remote property for its tactical advantages. Now, as these escaped convicts approach his home, they're about to learn why even the most dangerous predators sometimes become prey. This isn't just another home invasion story. This is about how three desperate men discovered that some quiet farmers have the deadliest skills of all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His farm sat on 40 acres of strategically chosen land in northern Michigan's dense forests. To passing travelers on the distant county road, it looked like any other modest homestead. Weathered red barn, equipment shed, two-story farmhouse with neat white trim. But like its owner, the property's ordinary appearance masked a carefully planned tactical position. Jack took a slow sip of coffee, his eyes continuously moving in the practiced scan pattern that had kept him alive through 4 combat tours. The elevated porch offered clear sightlines to all likely approach vectors. The seemingly decorative rock landscaping provided natural cover and shooting positions. Even the barn's placement wasn't accidental. It created a perfect crossfire zone with the house. Inside, past the warm country kitchen and comfortable living room that any retired farmer might have, Jack's home contained subtle differences, reinforced. Outdoors, bulletproof windows disguised as energy-efficient upgrades, a basement that would make his former SEAL teammates nod in approval. "Just another quiet morning, eh, Scout?" he murmured to the German shepherd, who'd materialized silently at his side. The dog's ears twitched, constantly alert. Like her master, Scout's friendly appearance belied intensive tactical training. Jack had chosen this life carefully after leaving the teams. 20 years of operating in the world's deadliest environments had left him with a deep appreciation for peace and quiet, but also an inability to ever truly lower his guard. Here he could have both, solitude and security. His morning routine remained unchanged from his active duty days. 5-mile run through carefully memorized trails. 2 hours in his hidden gym, maintaining the strength and agility that had once made him one of the military's deadliest snipers. Weapons maintenance, though his arsenal now appeared to be nothing more than a farmer's typical collection of hunting rifles. By 0900, he was tending to his small herd of cattle, a legitimate farming operation that also provided an excuse for his regular property patrols. The animals served another purpose too, their behavior often alerting him to visitors long before they reached his gates. The locals knew him as a quiet veteran-turned-farmer, friendly enough, but clearly preferring his solitude. The few who'd visited might notice his habit of always positioning himself with clear views of approaches and exits, or the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings. But they'd never guess that the modest farmhouse contained firing positions covering every angle of approach, or that their neighbor could still put a round through a target's center mass from 1,000 yards out. Jack liked it that way. After 15 years of operating in the shadows, anonymity had become both comfort and shield. His small farm stand by the road let him maintain enough community contact to avoid suspicion, while keeping most visitors at a comfortable distance. The morning sun climbed higher as he worked, its warmth barely penetrating the late autumn chill. Scout ranged ahead of him, her patrol pattern matching his own systematic coverage of the property. Together they checked fences, maintained equipment, and tended to the daily tasks that made his cover as a simple farmer convincing. But even as his hands worked at mundane chores, Jack's mind remained sharp, processing his surroundings with ingrained tactical awareness. He noted the wind direction and speed, automatically calculating bullet drop adjustments, calculations he hoped he'd never need again, but couldn't stop making. Every change in his environment registered: bird calls falling silent, Scout's subtle shift in attention toward distant sounds, the almost imperceptible vibration of vehicles on the county road. This was his life now, simple on the surface, complex underneath, carefully balanced between the peace he sought and the readiness he couldn't abandon. He'd chosen this property for its defensive advantages, prepared it with the same meticulous attention to detail that had once made him legendary among his fellow SEALs. Not because he expected trouble, but because 2 decades of combat experience had taught him that trouble rarely announced its arrival in advance. As morning turned to afternoon, Jack allowed himself a small smile. Another quiet day in paradise. But even as he thought it, his hands automatically checked the concealed sidearm that never left his side. Some habits weren't meant to be broken. They were meant to keep you alive. The first hint that something was wrong came from Scout. The German shepherd's ears perked forward, her casual patrol pattern shifting to alert status as she focused on the distant tree line. Jack noted the change immediately, his body responding. Before his conscious mind processed the warning, years of combat experience had taught him to trust his dog's instincts. He continued his work on the fence line, movements unhurried, but his senses heightened to full tactical awareness. The afternoon had turned grey, heavy clouds threatening early winter snow, perfect weather for people trying to move unseen. The radio in his barn crackled to life with a weather update, but it was the following news bulletin that caught his attention. Breaking news from the Marshall Maximum Security Prison. Authorities confirm 3 inmates escaped during this morning's work detail. Residents in northern Michigan are advised to stay alert. Jack's mind automatically began processing tactical implications. Marshall was 60 miles southeast. A determined group could have covered that distance by now, especially if they'd managed to steal transportation. The weather and approaching darkness would work in their favor. His cell phone vibrated. Sheriff Mike Cooper, one of the few people who had a hint of Jack's background. "Guess you heard the news," Cooper said without preamble. "Thought you should know. These aren't regular inmates. 2 former special forces gone bad, 1 cartel assassin. They know what they're doing." "Appreciate the heads up," Jack replied, already mentally cataloguing his defensive preparations. "Any direction of travel?" Last confirmed sighting was near. Riverside, heading north on the old Forest Service roads. Your place would be the first substantial shelter they'd hit if they're taking that route. Cooper paused. "Need me to send some deputies your way?" "Negative," Jack answered, falling naturally into operational terminology. "Better to keep your people visible on the main roads. Might discourage them from heading this way." And if they came anyway, he didn't want law enforcement caught in the crossfire. After ending the call, Jack maintained his normal routine, but with purpose underlying every movement. He guided his cattle to the south pasture, clearing his lines of fire, while appearing to simply protect them from the coming storm. His evening property check became a methodical verification of defensive positions and equipment caches. Scout stayed close, her behavior shifting to full operational mode. They'd trained together for exactly this scenario, though Jack had hoped they'd never need those skills again. The dog knew every inch of the property, every hiding spot, every approach vector. In his basement, behind a wall that appeared to hold preserves and farm supplies, Jack accessed his real preparation room. Gun safe containing weapons far more sophisticated than simple hunting rifles. Night vision equipment, body armor, communications gear that no farmer would need. He checked each piece with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from countless pre-mission equipment checks taking over. The afternoon light was fading fast as he made his final preparations. To anyone watching, he appeared to be simply battening down for the coming storm. The extra locks checked on the barn. Normal storm precaution. The subtle reinforcement of window shutters. Standard winter preparation in Michigan. His careful inspection of the property's perimeter, just a conscientious farmer protecting his livestock. But beneath these ordinary actions, Jack was preparing for war. He knew how desperate men thought, how they'd approach a target they assumed. Was soft. His property presented an appealing target, isolated, well-stocked, apparent lack of security. The perfect place for escaped convicts to resupply and hole up. They'd be watching now, if they were coming, learning his routine, looking for weaknesses. Jack gave them exactly what they'd expect to see. A solitary farmer, maybe a bit more careful than most, but nothing to raise alarm. Let them think him an easy target. Let them believe they had the advantage. Inside the house, he activated surveillance systems that would have impressed his former SEAL team members. Cameras hidden in trees covered every approach. Motion sensors monitored blind spots. All feeding to displays concealed behind barnwood panels in his living room. As darkness approached, Jack settled into what appeared to be a comfortable evening routine. Lights on in predictable patterns, TV volume at normal levels. But Scout was positioned strategically by the front window, her senses focused outward. And Jack's favorite reading chair just happened to provide clear views of likely attack vectors while keeping him in shadows. The first snow began to fall as night fully claimed the land. Jack watched the white flakes through his window, knowing they would both help and hinder. Snow would show tracks, make silent approach harder, but it would also cover traces, mask, sounds, and provide natural camouflage for anyone wearing white. He smiled grimly as he recalled similar nights in combat zones around the world. The waiting was always the hardest part, but patience was a sniper's greatest weapon, and Jack Morrison had been one of the best. Let them come. They thought they were hunting an unsuspecting farmer. Instead, they were walking into a trap set by someone who had spent his entire career preparing for exactly this kind of fight. The storm was coming in more ways than one, and Jack Morrison was ready for both. The first real confirmation came at 2300 hours. Scout's ears twitched toward the north fence line, her muscles tensing imperceptibly. Simultaneously, one of Jack's hidden motion sensors registered movement, too large for deer, too deliberate. For random wildlife. Through his thermal scope, Jack observed 3 heat signatures moving along his property's edge. Their movement patterns confirmed Sheriff Cooper's intelligence. These weren't ordinary escapees. They maintained proper spacing, used available cover, and moved with tactical precision that spoke of military training. Beginning perimeter probe, Jack whispered into his encrypted radio, maintaining communications discipline out of ingrained habit, even though he was alone. Scout lay silently at his feet, awaiting commands. The intruders split up, demonstrating classic reconnaissance formation. 2 moved toward the barn, while 1 approached the house. Their technique was solid, but they were operating on assumptions that would prove fatal, assuming the property had no surveillance, assuming its owner was sleeping, assuming they held tactical surprise. Jack tracked them through multiple camera feeds, his mind automatically calculating firing solutions, even though he hoped to avoid lethal force. The leader, moving toward his house, showed the most professional approach, minimal exposure, excellent use of shadow. Former Special Forces, definitely. The second, covering the barn's southern approach, moved well but occasionally broke discipline, checking over his shoulder too frequently. The third showed different training entirely, smoother, more predatory, but less tactically rigid. The cartel assassin. A metallic click from the barn caught his attention. They were picking the locks, professional-grade tools from the sound. Jack allowed himself a grim smile. The barn's apparent vulnerability was by design, an inviting target that would tell them exactly what he wanted them to know. Inside, they'd find what appeared to be a normal farmer's barn. Equipment, feed, basic supplies. The gun safe they'd inevitably discover contained only hunting rifles, nothing to suggest unusual security. But they'd also find subtle signs of preparation that would make professional operators pause. Too much stored food, too many fuel cans, too much ammunition for simple hunting. "Contact team has breached barn structure," Jack sub-vocalized, maintaining his verbal log. Implementing response protocol Alpha. With practiced efficiency, he activated the first phase of his defense plan. Nothing obvious, no lights, no alarms. Instead, subtle changes began across his property. The barn's hidden cameras activated their infrared capability. Pressure sensors in the yard began logging movement patterns. Most importantly, concealed speakers buried around his perimeter activated, broadcasting subsonic frequencies that would play havoc with night vision equipment. The two in the barn were doing a professional search, but their body language showed increasing tension. They'd found his carefully planned indicators, signs that their target might not be as simple as they'd hoped. The leader, meanwhile, had reached his back porch, demonstrating impressive stealth skills. Jack watched through multiple camera angles as the man tested his back door with expert precision. The lock would appear to be simple, but attempting to pick it would trigger silent alerts throughout the property. The leader hesitated, clearly sensing something wrong, but unable to identify what. That's when Jack implemented his first active countermeasure. Scout, trained for exactly this scenario, moved silently to her predetermined position. At Jack's subtle hand signal, she let out a single low growl, not from her actual position, but amplified through hidden speakers near the tree line. The effect was immediate. All three intruders froze, their body language shifting from confident to alert. The growl seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, making it impossible to pinpoint. More importantly, it announced that the house's occupant was awake and aware. Multiple targets showing increased tactical awareness, Jack logged quietly. Implementing Phase 2, he triggered his property's external lighting, not all at once, but in a careful sequence designed to force the intruders to move in predictable directions. The barn team retreated toward their predetermined fallback position, exactly as his plan had anticipated. The leader, however, demonstrated impressive adaptability, using the changing light patterns to move closer to the house. Jack allowed himself a moment of professional admiration. These were no common criminals. Their responses showed extensive training and experience, but they were operating blind, while he had spent years preparing this battleground. Through his thermal scope, he watched them regroup at the edge of his property. Their hand signals confirmed military background, precise, efficient communication. They were reassessing, adapting their plan, standard operating procedure when initial infiltration failed. "Targets have withdrawn to Sector 7, Jack noted. Maintaining surveillance. He knew they wouldn't give up. The storm was intensifying, temperature dropping rapidly. They needed shelter, supplies, and transportation. His farm remained their best option, isolated, well-stocked, and apparently defended only by an alert dog and cautious owner. Let them think that. Let them believe they'd simply hit better security than expected. They'd regroup, plan a more aggressive approach. But now they'd be focused on overcoming the defenses they'd discovered, never suspecting they were merely the surface layer of a much more comprehensive system. Jack settled into his primary observation position, Scout at his side. Years of combat. Experience had taught him that patience was as deadly as any weapon. He'd given his opponents their first surprise, shown them just enough to make them cautious. Now they'd be watching, planning, looking for patterns and weaknesses. Phase 1 complete, he whispered, eyes never leaving his surveillance feeds. Contact team has withdrawn but maintaining observation. Storm intensity increasing, implementing extended surveillance protocol. The night was still young, and this was just the opening move in what promised to be a deadly game. But Jack Morrison had spent his entire career preparing for exactly this kind of fight. Each motion sensor activation, each camera feed, each subtle defensive measure added another piece to his tactical picture. They thought they were hunting him. Soon, they'd learn just how wrong they were. As Jack watched the intruders regroup through his thermal scope, his mind flashed back to Bud's training 20 years earlier. Chief Peterson's gravelly voice echoed in his memory. "The battlefield belongs to the man who prepares it." Back then, he'd been learning the basics of setting up a sniper's hide. Now, he'd turned his entire property into one massive prepared position. "Scout, patrol route 2, he whispered. The German shepherd moved silently through the house, checking predetermined positions. Her movement would be visible through the windows, another calculated element of his defense. Let them see the dog performing predictable patrols. Let them think they could time their approach around her patterns. The storm was picking up intensity, driving snow, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. Jack switched through his surveillance feeds, tracking heat signatures through the whiteout. The three intruders had split up again, taking observation positions that confirmed their professional training. They were setting up a classic triangle formation, preparing for a coordinated assault. Another memory surfaced. Advanced tactical training in Norway. "Weather isn't your enemy," his instructor had said. "It's a tool if you know how to use it." Jack had spent countless hours training in whiteout conditions, learning to use storms to his advantage. Now he began implementing those lessons. He activated his property's environmental modifications, subtle changes that looked natural but would channel movement in predictable directions. The snow buildup on his roof began melting in strategic patterns, creating ice barriers in some approaches while leaving others deceptively clear. Heating elements buried in certain pathways started melting the snow, creating apparent safe routes that were actually perfect killing zones. Through his command center's displays, Jack noted how the intruders were positioning themselves. The leader, clearly visible by his superior tactical movement, had taken up position near the old oak tree, exactly where Jack had planted his most sophisticated surveillance equipment. Every whispered word of their planning would be picked up by directional microphones, disguised as bark. "Have to hit it before dawn." The leader's voice came through clearly. "Temperatures dropping, storms getting worse. That dog's going to be a problem." Another voice, this one with a slight accent, the cartel assassin, showing professional concern for their biggest visible obstacle. "We handle the dog first," the third man spoke. "I've got experience with K9 units. Give me 5 minutes alone and—" "Negative," the leader cut him off. "No separate movements. Owners too alert. We go in together, full breach." Jack allowed himself a small smile. They were falling into his preferred scenario. A coordinated attack would be more dangerous, but also more predictable. They'd focus on known threats, the dog, the locked doors, the obvious security measures. Meanwhile, his real defenses would remain undetected until it was too late. He began his own preparations, moving through his house with practiced silence. Each room had been prepared for this kind of fight, though no casual visitor would ever notice. The comfortable reading chair that provided perfect cover and fields of fire, the solid oak table that could stop bullets, the decorative mirrors positioned to give views of blind spots. Scout returned from her patrol, taking up her position near the front window. Right on schedule, maintaining the pattern that the observers would be noting and timing. Jack checked his weapons one last time. Not the hunting rifles visible in the gun safe, but the custom tactical gear hidden throughout the house. His radio crackled softly. "Jack, you copy?" Sheriff Cooper's voice pitched low. "Got reports of suspicious movement near your area. You need backup?" "Negative," Jack responded quietly. "Have your people maintain perimeter on the main roads. I've got this handled." He paused, then added, "But if you hear things getting loud, wait for my signal before responding." "Understood," Cooper replied, and Jack could hear the grim acknowledgement in his voice. The sheriff had seen enough of Jack's capabilities during their quiet range sessions to know what he could do. Through the surveillance system, Jack observed the intruders' final positioning. They were good, using the storm for cover, maintaining proper intervals, choosing approaches that minimized exposure. But they were working from a flawed tactical assessment, assuming they were dealing with an alert but ordinary homeowner. The storm worked in their favor, masking sound and movement. But Jack had trained for Arctic warfare, learned to fight in conditions that would shut down most operators. Every snowflake, every gust of wind, every shadow was a potential tool in his arsenal. He settled into his primary defensive position, Scout at his side. His house's layout would force them to breach in specific ways if they wanted to maintain tactical advantage. Each likely entry point was covered by overlapping fields of fire, every approach channeled by subtle environmental manipulation. "Just like Kabul," he whispered to Scout, remembering another snowy night, another prepared position. But this time he was defending his own ground, protecting his own territory. In some ways, that made it simpler. In others, infinitely more complex. The intruders were making their final preparations. Through the directional mics, he could hear them synchronizing watches, checking weapons, confirming breach points. Their discipline was impressive, their planning solid. Against most targets, their approach would be overwhelming, but they hadn't spent years turning their target into a prepared battlefield. They didn't know about the pressure plates hidden under apparent safe approaches, the thermal sensors masked as ordinary fixtures, the carefully planned firing positions covering every angle of advance. Jack checked his watch. Based on their observed patterns and whispered planning, they'd make their move in approximately 20 minutes, time enough for one final equipment check, one last verification of his defensive setup. "All elements in position," he subvocalized, maintaining his tactical log. "Contact imminent, beginning countdown to active defense protocol." The storm howled outside, visibility dropping even further. But through his thermal imaging, through his carefully placed sensors and cameras, Jack Morrison saw everything. The hunters were about to learn what it meant to attack a predator in his own territory. Time seemed to slow as Jack made his final preparations. The storm outside had reached full intensity, wind howling against his reinforced windows, snow creating a white wall beyond his surveillance camera's infrared range. Perfect conditions. In for an assault, if you weren't prepared for it. Through his command center's feeds, he studied his opponent's last-minute preparations. The leader, Jack had mentally tagged him as Alpha, was good. His hand signals were crisp, his tactical positioning perfect. Former Green Beret or Delta Force, Jack guessed, noting the distinctive movement patterns. The second man, Bravo in Jack's tactical shorthand, showed similar training but less discipline. The way he checked his weapon, his slightly too fast movements, signs of growing tension that could be exploited. The third, the cartel assassin, Charlie, moved differently, smoother, more predatory, but less tactically rigid. Multiple targets preparing for synchronized breach, Jack logged quietly. Alpha team showing professional coordination. Estimated. Time to contact, 15 minutes. He pulled up the property's thermal mapping on his command display. The intruders had chosen their positions well, using terrain features for cover while maintaining clear lines of advance. But they'd unknowingly positioned themselves exactly where his defense plan anticipated. His radio crackled softly. "Morrison got movement on County Road 23, Sheriff Cooper reported. 2 vehicles, no lights, heading north. Could be their extraction team." "Copy that," Jack replied. "Keep your people back unless I call. Don't want them walking into a tactical situation." What he didn't say was that he'd already factored potential reinforcements into his defense plan. Scout's ears twitched toward the north corner of the house. Through his surveillance system, Jack watched Alpha testing the kitchen window's lock, professionally, silently, but activating 3 separate sensor systems in the process. Each penetration attempt provided more data, more insight into their tactical approach. Jack moved to his secondary position, remembering another night years ago in Kandahar. His spotter had asked him how he stayed so calm before an operation. "Fear is natural," Jack had responded. "The trick is using it to sharpen your focus instead of clouding it." He felt that familiar focus now, his senses heightened but controlled. Every sound registered, the storm's howl, Scout's steady breathing, the barely perceptible creak of snow-laden branches. His body was relaxed but ready, each movement precise and economical. Through the directional microphones, he caught fragments of the intruder's final planning. "Admits simultaneous breach, 3 points," Alpha was saying. "Watch for the dog. No shots unless absolutely necessary. Sound carries in this weather. Owner's bedroom is upper floor, northwest corner," Bravo added. "Fast sweep of ground floor, then up. Remember, we need him alive." That detail caught Jack's attention. Need him alive. This wasn't just about finding shelter or supplies. They were after something specific. The realization added another layer to his tactical calculations. He switched through thermal feeds, noting how the storm was affecting visibility and movement patterns. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees, cold enough to start impacting weapon functionality if you weren't prepared for it. Jack's equipment had been winterized, tested in far worse conditions. He doubted his opponents had the same advantage. "Scout, final position," he whispered. The German shepherd moved silently to her prepared spot, not where the intruders would expect, but where she could respond instantly to Jack's commands. They'd see her initial patrol route through the windows, assume they knew her patterns. Another calculated deception. His surveillance picks up more movement. The intruders were beginning their final approach, using the storm's coverage exactly as he'd anticipated. Their movement was coordinated, professional, 3-man team operating as a single unit. In other circumstances, Jack might have admired their technique. "Multiple targets initiating final approach," he logged. "Alpha team moving to breach positions, implementing last-stage defensive protocols." He made his own final adjustments, checking fields of fire one last time, verifying that each prepared position could be reached silently, efficiently. His weapons were ready, his backup plans in place. Years of combat experience had taught him that no plan survived first contact perfectly, but proper preparation multiplied. Your options. Through the thermal imaging, he watched them take their breach positions. Alpha at the kitchen door, Bravo covering the front entrance, Charlie moving toward the side window. Standard tactical triangulation. They'd hit all points simultaneously, expecting to overwhelm any resistance with speed and coordination. 10 minutes to contact. Jack felt the familiar calm settling over him, the sniper's stillness that had made him legendary in the teams. Every sense was heightened, every movement precise, but his mind remained clear and focused. "Remember your training," Alpha's whispered words carried through the directional mics. "Fast, clean, professional, just like we practiced," Jack allowed. Himself, a grim smile. They had indeed practiced, probably rehearsed this type of breach countless times. But they were operating on a flawed assumption that they were attacking an ordinary farmhouse. Instead, they were walking into a prepared defensive position held by someone who'd spent decades learning how to turn terrain advantage into tactical superiority. 5 minutes to contact, he logged. All systems operational, scout in position, beginning final countdown. The storm reached a new intensity, snow and wind creating a white wall beyond his windows. To most operators, these conditions would be a significant obstacle. To Jack Morrison, they were another tool in his arsenal, another element he'd trained to exploit. Let them come. Let them believe their training and coordination would guarantee success. They were about to learn the hardest lesson in combat. That sometimes the most dangerous target is the one that looks the least threatening. 2 minutes, he whispered, both to himself and Scout. Time to welcome our guests. The breach came exactly as Jack had anticipated. Synchronized attacks at 3 points, professionally executed. The kitchen door's lock gave way silently. The front entrance's hinges parted smoothly, and the side window's latch released without sound. Perfect coordination, textbook execution, too perfect. Each entry point had been prepared, subtly weakened to fail exactly as Jack wanted. The intruders flowed into his house with practiced efficiency, their movement patterns confirming his earlier assessments of their training. Multiple targets have breached perimeter, Jack sub-vocalized into his tactical log. Implementing response protocol Delta. He watched through his thermal imaging as Alpha Team cleared rooms with professional precision. Their technique was excellent. Perfect stack formation, thorough but quick sweep patterns, efficient coverage of angles. They moved like they'd done this 100 times before, in a way they had, but never in a house specifically designed to counter their tactics. The first surprise came in the living room. Charlie, sweeping the left flank, triggered a pressure plate disguised as a loose floorboard. Instantly, the room's geography changed. Furniture that appeared randomly placed became perfect cover. Seemingly decorative items became obstacles. Contact. Contact. Charlie's whispered warning was sharp but controlled, professional. Jack allowed himself a grim smile as he watched them adapt. They were good, immediately shifting to defensive positions, maintaining their coordination even as they processed that something was wrong. But they were already following the path he'd prepared, moving exactly where he wanted them. Scout remained perfectly still in her hidden position, waiting for Jack's signal. Through his surveillance, he watched the intruders' heat signatures converge on his apparent location, the master bedroom upstairs. They'd found his sleeping form, the thermal dummy rigged to give off human heat signatures. Target location confirmed, Alpha whispered. Moving to. The rest of his words were lost as Jack implemented his first active countermeasure. The house's lighting system, rigged to his specifications, activated in a precise sequence, not to illuminate, but to blind. Each light was positioned to create shadows and glare points that would disrupt night vision equipment without revealing his position. Night vision compromised, Bravo hissed, switching to thermal. But the thermal imaging they relied on was already being confused by carefully placed heat sources throughout the house. Every room presented multiple human-sized heat signatures, making it impossible to distinguish the real target from the decoys. Jack moved silently through his prepared routes as the intruders tried to regain tactical control. Their training showed. They maintained formation, adapted quickly, kept their cool, but with each passing second, they were losing their initial advantage. Where is he? Charlie's frustration leaked into his whispered question. This isn't right, the intel said. Quiet, Alpha commanded. Maintain discipline, he's here somewhere. Jack keyed his radio once, the signal Scout had been waiting for. The German Shepherd moved, not to attack, but to implement the next phase of his plan. Her movement created just enough noise to draw attention, to make them turn slightly toward the sound. That moment of distraction was all Jack needed. He shifted positions again, using routes they couldn't know existed, staying ahead of their sweep patterns. Each movement was calculated, designed not just to avoid detection, but to gradually draw them into his prepared kill zone. Multiple targets, moving as anticipated, he logged quietly, beginning phase 2 of contact protocol. The intruders were now exactly where he wanted them, clustered in his upstairs hallway, their apparent tactical advantage about to become a liability. They still moved well, still maintained professional discipline, but uncertainty had crept into their movements. They were starting to realize that something was very wrong with this simple farmhouse. From his concealed position, Jack watched the intruders' growing frustration through multiple camera feeds. Their professional demeanor was cracking, subtle signs that only years of combat experience could detect. Alpha's hand signals becoming slightly more aggressive. Bravo checking corners a fraction too quickly. Charlie's movements showing predatory impatience. "This isn't just some paranoid farmer," Alpha whispered, his voice clear through Jack's directional microphones. "The heat signatures, the counter-surveillance. This is professional work." "The file said he was military," Bravo responded. "Didn't say anything about this level of preparation." Jack's interest sharpened. They had a file on him. Intelligence, background. This wasn't random. They'd chosen his farm specifically, but their intel was incomplete. Another advantage he could exploit. Scout's low growl echoed through the house, not from her position but from hidden speakers in the basement. The sound dispersion was perfect, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. Jack watched the intruders' heat signatures tense, their formation tightening instinctively. "Sweep lower level again," Alpha ordered. "He's playing with us." They moved downstairs in perfect tactical formation, covering each other, maintaining discipline despite their growing unease. But they were reacting now, following his lead instead of executing their own plan. In combat, initiative was often the difference between victory and defeat. Jack keyed his radio twice, the signal for his next countermeasure. Throughout the house, subtle environmental changes began. The heating system activated in specific zones, creating false heat signatures. Ventilation fans altered air currents, affecting sound propagation. Each change was small, but together they created an environment where tactical training worked against them. "This is wrong," Charlie muttered, his cartel training showing in. His instinctive response to danger. "We should pull back, get more men." "No time," Alpha replied. "Target's too valuable. Intelligence says he knows." A sudden crash from the kitchen cut him off. All three spun toward the sound, maintaining their coverage, but splitting their attention, just as Jack had planned. The noise, Scout knocking over a prepared set of pans, had revealed more about their mission. They needed him alive, needed information. That limited their options. Multiple targets showing increased tactical stress, Jack logged quietly. Intel suggests specific extraction mission rather than random target of opportunity. He moved through his hidden pathways, using routes concealed behind seemingly solid walls. His house was a maze of prepared positions, observation points, and escape routes. But unlike a normal kill house, every deadly feature was hidden behind an ordinary facade. The intruders had regrouped in his living room, using furniture as cover, while they reassessed. Their technique remained professional, but their tactical situation was deteriorating. Their night vision was compromised, their thermal imaging confused by multiple heat sources, and their sound orientation disrupted by his acoustic countermeasures. "Target is highly trained," Alpha whispered to his team. "Possible Tier 1 background. Adjust tactics accordingly." Jack allowed himself a grim smile. They were starting to understand, but too late. Every minute spent in his house was another minute where his preparation and knowledge of the environment increased his advantage. They were fighting blind in his territory, while he saw everything. Through his surveillance system, he watched them implement new search patterns, slower, more methodical. They were adapting, showing the experience that made them dangerous. But they were still operating on a fundamental misconception. They thought they were hunting him, beginning final positioning, he logged. Targets proceeding exactly as anticipated, preparing for active engagement. The storm outside had reached its peak, wind and snow creating a white wall beyond his windows. The temperature had dropped further, affecting weapon operation and tactical movement. But while they dealt with the environmental challenges, Jack was in his element. Every aspect of his house, from the temperature gradients to the sound dynamics, had been prepared for exactly this scenario. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and they didn't even realize it yet. The revelation came through a whispered conversation Jack's directional microphones caught as the intruders regrouped in his dining room. "We're running out of time," Bravo hissed. "If we don't get the Santiago files from him before extraction—" "Maintain radio discipline," Alpha cut him off sharply, but the damage was done. Jack felt his combat focus intensify. The Santiago operation, classified mission from 3 years ago. Suddenly, their presence made tactical sense. They weren't here for random shelter or supplies. They were here for him specifically, for information he possessed about a mission that officially never happened. "Target mission parameters identified," he logged quietly. "Subject seeking classified intelligence from Operation Santiago. Escalating threat assessment." Through his surveillance system, he watched the intruders adopt a new search pattern. They'd abandoned any pretense of this being a simple breach-and-clear operation. Their movements now showed the urgency of men on a timetable, though their professional discipline remained intact. "Multiple targets initiating aggressive search pattern," he noted. "Time pressure affecting tactical decisions." Scout's ears twitched toward new sounds from outside. Vehicles approaching on the county road, still distant but moving their way. The extraction team Bravo had mentioned, most likely. The situation was escalating beyond a simple defensive operation. 2. More heat signatures approaching from the east, Charlie reported, his cartel training evident in how quickly he'd spotted the new threats. "Local law enforcement?" "Negative," Alpha responded. "That's our backup, right on schedule." Jack processed this new tactical information. More operators incoming, likely similarly trained. The situation was about to become significantly more complicated, but with complication came opportunity. He triggered his next set of countermeasures. Throughout the house, subtle changes began. Temperature gradients shifted, creating false thermal signatures. Acoustic dampeners activated in specific zones, making sound perception unreliable. His house was becoming a tactical nightmare for anyone who didn't know its secrets. "Keep pushing," Alpha ordered his team. "He's here somewhere. The Santiago files have to be—" The rest of his words were lost as Jack implemented his first direct action. The house's main power cut out, not from their interference, but by his design. Emergency lights kicked in, but they were positioned to create disorienting shadows and false depth perception. "Power failure acknowledged," he logged. "Implementing direct contact protocol." The intruders reacted professionally, adjusting their positions to maintain coverage, despite the changed lighting conditions. But their formation had loosened slightly. The first real crack in their tactical discipline. Through his thermal imaging, Jack watched their heat signatures bunch closer together, a natural response to increasing tactical uncertainty. They were good, their training evident in every movement, but they were operating in an environment specifically designed to counter their tactics. "Santiago was supposed to be buried," Bravo muttered. "How did they even know?" "Focus," Alpha snapped. "Target's probably recording everything. Maintain operational security." Too late. Each whispered word confirmed Jack's suspicions about their mission. Someone had discovered his role in Operation Santiago, an off-books mission that had eliminated a major threat to national security. The only question was who had sent them and how much they really knew. Scout's subtle movement caught his attention. She'd detected something in the intruder's behavior that he needed to notice. Through his surveillance feeds, he saw it. Charlie had separated slightly from the others, his movement pattern shifting from military precision to something more predatory. The cartel assassin was going off script, his training and instincts overriding Alpha's tactical plan. It was the kind of small deviation that could unravel even the best prepared operation. Team cohesion showing first signs of breakdown, Jack logged. Implementing next phase of contact protocol. The storm outside reached a new level of intensity, wind howling through his prepared external channels, creating unpredictable sound patterns that would play havoc with tactical movement and communication. His advantage was reaching its peak. The intruders were in his kill zone, their tactical options limited, their time running out. They needed him alive for information, which restricted their options. He had no such limitations. The first sign that something was off came through Jack's directional microphones, a subtle change in Bravo's breathing pattern when Alpha mentioned their backup team. Years of combat experience had taught Jack to notice these small details. The man was nervous, but not about their tactical situation. "Contact team approaching outer perimeter," Jack logged quietly. "But something's wrong with the internal dynamic." He watched through his surveillance as Bravo's movements became slightly erratic, still professional, still coordinated, but with an underlying tension that didn't match the situation. The man kept checking his watch, his hand signals carrying an urgency that went beyond their mission parameters. Then came the tell. When Charlie moved to clear the kitchen again, Bravo's hand shifted not to cover his sector, but to reach for something in his vest. A movement Jack recognized from countless covert operations. The man was preparing to key a hidden radio. "Sir." Scout's sudden alertness drew Jack's attention to his external feeds. The approaching vehicles had killed their engines, coasting the final approach. Standard tactical procedure, except they were coming in from the wrong direction for the extraction team Alpha had mentioned. Through his thermal imaging, Jack watched Bravo make his move. The man deliberately fell slightly behind the others, his hand moving to his concealed radio. His whispered words were barely audible, but Jack's directional mics caught them clearly. "Eagle 6, package is compromised. Repeat, Santiago leak confirmed. They're not here for the files, they're here to bury them. Over." Jack's tactical assessment shifted instantly. Bravo wasn't just another escaped prisoner, he was a deep cover operative, which meant this entire scenario was more complex than a simple breach and interrogation. Multiple layers of operation confirmed, Jack logged. At least one covert asset in play, adjusting response protocols. He watched Alpha and Charlie continue their search, unaware that their third team member was reporting their movements to an unknown command structure. Bravo's tradecraft was excellent, his apparent nervousness now revealed as a carefully maintained cover. "Eagle 6 copies." The barely audible response came through Bravo's concealed earpiece. "Containment team in position. Maintain cover until..." The rest was lost as Alpha suddenly spun around. "Check that corner again," he ordered Bravo, his tone carrying a new edge of suspicion. Something's not right here. Jack observed the subtle shift in dynamics. Alpha's instincts had picked up on something. Maybe Bravo's slightly delayed responses. Maybe just the sixth sense that experienced operators developed. The tactical situation was about to unravel. Through his surveillance feeds, he tracked multiple heat signatures approaching his property's outer perimeter. Not just the extraction team Alpha had mentioned, but another group moving with different tactical patterns. The containment team Bravo had contacted most likely. "Sir," Scout's low growl carried warning. The German shepherd had detected something in the approaching team's movement that Jack needed to notice. Through his thermal imaging, he saw it. The two groups were maneuvering to engage each other, not the house. This wasn't just about the Santiago files anymore. It was an operation within an operation. Layers of deception and counter-deception playing out in his prepared kill zone. And at the center of it all was Bravo, a covert operative whose true allegiance remained unknown. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place when Jack's surveillance system picked up an encrypted transmission from the approaching containment team. The encryption pattern was one he recognized, because he'd helped develop it for Operation Santiago. "Target area is hot," the transmission crackled. "Dobson, if you copy, the Santiago leak goes straight to the top. Director Harrison is compromised. Primary target is now Alpha. He's Harrison's cleaner. Jack's combat focus sharpened. Bravo, or Dobson apparently, wasn't just any covert operative. He was part of the original Santiago team, deep undercover, to flush out a leak in the agency. And Alpha wasn't just an escaped prisoner or former Special Forces operator. He was a professional cleaner sent to eliminate everyone with knowledge of the operation. Mission parameters fundamentally altered. Jack logged. Alpha team leader identified as hostile agency asset. Santiago compromise extends to director level. Through his thermal imaging, he watched the tactical situation evolve. Alpha's movements had become more predatory, his suspicious glances at Bravo more frequent. Charlie, the cartel assassin, was shifting positions subtly, preparing for violence. The facade of team unity was crumbling. Eagle 6, be advised. Dobson's whispered transmission continued. Morrison's involvement was not accidental. Harrison wanted everyone connected to Santiago eliminated in what would appear to be a prison break gone wrong. The pieces fell into place. His isolated farm, his connection to Santiago, the apparent random timing. None of it was random. He'd been selected as the perfect location for what was supposed to look like a tragic home invasion, eliminating the last loose ends of an operation that had uncovered corruption at the highest levels. Multiple hostile elements converging, Jack noted, watching through his surveillance as the two approaching teams moved into position. Containment team is friendly, extraction team confirmed hostile, internal team dynamics deteriorating rapidly. Scout's ears twitched toward a new sound, the subtle click of a weapon being readied. Through his cameras, Jack watched Alpha make his move. The man's motion was fluid, professional, as he brought his weapon to bear on Bravo's back. "I really wanted to wait until we had the files," Alpha said coldly. "But you've been sloppy, Agent Dobson. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize agency tradecraft?" But Dobson had been ready. His response was instant, diving for cover as Charlie's weapon appeared. The cartel assassin, it seemed, had his own agenda, his aim shifting between both. Men, waiting to see how the situation played out. All elements initiating active confrontation, Jack logged. Time to change the game. The storm outside had reached its peak, snow and wind creating a white wall beyond his windows. But through his thermal imaging and surveillance network, he saw everything. The approaching teams, the internal confrontation, the multiple layers of deception unraveling all at once. This wasn't just about protecting his home anymore. It was about finishing what Operation Santiago had started, exposing corruption that went to the highest levels of the agency. And he was the only one with the complete picture, the only one who could ensure the right people walked out of this alive. Jack's mind raced through tactical calculations as he watched the scene unfold through his surveillance system. 3 immediate threats inside his house: Alpha, the agency cleaner; Charlie, the cartel assassin with unknown allegiance; and Dobson, the undercover operative whose cover was now blown. Outside, 2 teams converging, one friendly containment team, one hostile extraction team, multiple threat vectors active, he logged quietly. Implementing crisis response protocol. His first priority was Dobson. The operative had vital intelligence about the agency corruption. But Alpha was a professional eliminator, and Charlie was a wild card who could tip the balance either way. Through his thermal imaging, he tracked Alpha's position. The cleaner had taken cover behind Jack's reinforced oak table, his weapon trained on Dobson's last known position. Charlie had melted into the shadows near the kitchen, his predatory instinct serving him well in the deteriorating situation. Eagle 6. Situation critical. Dobson's whispered transmission came through Jack's surveillance. Request immediate. The rest was cut off as Alpha opened fire, his suppressed weapon coughing softly. The shots were precise, professional, designed to wound rather than kill. He still wanted information. Jack moved silently through his prepared routes, using his house's hidden pathways to maneuver into position. Years of combat experience had taught him that timing was everything in situations like this. Scout remained perfectly still in her concealed position, awaiting his signal. Through the external cameras, he watched the two approaching teams draw closer. The storm worked in his favor, forcing them to move more slowly, giving him time to implement his response. "All elements in final positioning," he logged. "Initiating active intervention protocol." It was time to remind everyone why Navy SEALs, especially snipers, were considered among the world's deadliest operators. His home wasn't just defended. It was a prepared killing ground where every angle, every shadow, every apparent point of cover had been carefully calculated. The storm raged outside, but inside his house, a different kind of storm was about to break. The situation deteriorated rapidly. Alpha's professional facade cracked as his frustration mounted. Each careful shot meant to pressure Dobson, giving away more of his position. Charlie had disappeared entirely, his heat signature showing he'd slipped into the kitchen, using the multiple exits to maintain tactical flexibility. "Containment team 60 seconds out," Jack logged, watching the approaching friendlies through his external cameras. "Hostile extraction team maintaining parallel approach. Convergence imminent." He needed to act before the situation exploded into an uncontrolled firefight. His house was prepared for combat, but too many rounds could compromise its structural integrity. More importantly, Dobson needed to survive. He was the key to exposing the corruption at the agency. Through his thermal imaging, Jack tracked Charlie's movement. The cartel assassin was good, using the home's layout to maintain multiple escape routes while looking for an advantage. But he was operating on incomplete information, unaware that every apparent tactical option was part of Jack's prepared defense. "Last chance, Dobson," Alpha called out, his voice carrying professional menace. "The files aren't worth dying for. Give me Santiago's data, and this ends clean." "We both know nothing ends clean with you," Dobson responded, his position hidden behind reinforced walls. "How many other operations have you buried for Harrison?" The question sparked increased aggression from Alpha. His next shots were less controlled, emotion affecting his professional discipline. Jack watched through his surveillance as the cleaner's positioning became sloppier, presenting opportunities that hadn't existed before. Scout's ears twitched toward new sounds. The containment team had reached his outer perimeter. Their movement was professional but urgent. Through his external feeds, he could see the hostile extraction team paralleling their advance, setting up for what would become a critical confrontation. "All elements approaching final convergence," Jack logged. "Implementing terminal defense protocol." The storm outside reached its peak intensity, wind and snow creating a white wall beyond his windows. But through his surveillance system, through carefully placed sensors and cameras, he saw everything. Years of preparation, of turning his home into a prepared battleground, were about to pay off. It was time to end this. Time to show these professionals why Navy SEALs, especially those who'd spent their careers perfecting the art of tactical patience, were considered among the world's most lethal operators. "Scout," he whispered, "execute." Scout's movement was silent but decisive. The German Shepherd activated the first of Jack's prepared triggers, a sequence of small distractions designed to force his opponents into predictable responses. In the kitchen, a pot clattered to the floor. In the living room, a shadow shifted. Upstairs, footsteps seemed to creak across old floorboards. Charlie reacted first, his cartel training making him jumpy. His weapon tracked the false movements, giving away his position more clearly. Alpha, more disciplined, held his ground, but his attention split, creating micro-opportunities that Jack could exploit. Multiple targets responding to distraction protocol, Jack logged. External teams in final approach positions. Through his surveillance system, he watched the two approaching forces. The containment team had split into standard infiltration formation, while the hostile extraction team maintained a tighter, more aggressive pattern. Their convergence would trigger the final phase of this confrontation. Dobson used the momentary confusion to improve his position, moving exactly where Jack's prepared route suggested. The undercover operative's tradecraft was excellent. He'd recognized the deliberate nature of the distractions and was playing along, becoming part of Jack's tactical plan without explicit coordination. "You're surrounded, Alpha," Dobson called. Out, his voice steady. "Harrison's going down. Don't die for a corrupt director." Alpha's response was a burst of suppressed fire, but the shots went wide, his professional composure finally cracking. "Harrison's not corrupt," he snarled. "He's protecting the agency from operators who can't see the bigger picture." The confession was all Jack needed. Through his directional mics, he knew the approaching containment team had heard it too. Evidence secured, mission parameters simplified. Now it was just a matter of execution. All elements in final position, he logged. Initiating terminal sequence. Scout took her final position. The storm reached its peak intensity. And in Jack Morrison's carefully prepared kill house, the final pieces fell into place. 0 hour had arrived. Jack's first move was so subtle that none of his opponents registered it as an attack. The house's heating system shifted, creating temperature gradients that played havoc with thermal imaging. Alpha's next shots went wide as his targeting systems failed, the professional killer suddenly fighting blind. What the Charlie's curse cut off as Scout implemented the next phase. The German Shepherd's carefully timed movement drew instinctive fire from the cartel assassin, revealing his position perfectly in Jack's surveillance system. Multiple targets responding as anticipated, Jack logged, implementing direct action. Protocol. His first physical engagement was precise, devastating. Using his home's hidden pathways, he emerged behind Charlie just as the assassin was reacting to Scout's movement. One practice strike to a nerve cluster, and the cartel killer dropped silently, unconscious, before he hit the ground. Contact. "Team, this is Eagle 6. The containment team's transmission crackled. "Breach in 30 seconds. Confirm status." "Negative breach," Jack transmitted on their frequency, using authentication codes from Operation Santiago. "Maintain perimeter containment. Internal situation under control." Alpha's response to losing Charlie was professional but rushed. The cleaner began rapid single shots, attempting to map positions through fire, but each bullet found reinforced. Barriers or empty space. Jack's house designing forcing him to waste ammunition. "It's over, Morrison," Alpha called out, his voice steady despite the deteriorating situation. "You're good, I'll give you that, but I've got an extraction team incoming and your extraction team is already engaged," Jack responded, his voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere thanks to his prepared acoustic system. "They're a little busy with CIA containment right now." Through his external cameras, he watched the two teams engage at his property's edge. The hostile extraction force had walked right into prepared fields of fire, their tactical advantage negated by superior positioning. Inside, Dobson used the distraction to move to a better position, demonstrating the skills that had kept him alive undercover. "Harrison's going down, Alpha," the operative called out. "We have recordings, documentation. Santiago was just the beginning." Alpha's response was a burst of automatic fire that chewed through Jack's drywall, but found no targets. The cleaner was burning through ammunition rapidly now, his professional demeanor cracking. Jack moved silently through his prepared routes, positioning himself for the final confrontation. Through his surveillance, he watched Alpha's increasing desperation. The cleaner had recognized the trap, but couldn't find a way out. "Your position is compromised," Jack projected his voice through his house's speaker system. "Your extraction team is neutralized. Charlie is down. You have one chance to survive this." Alpha's laugh was harsh. You think this ends with me? Harrison has contingencies. Files buried so deep that only someone with Santiago clearance could access them? Jack interrupted. Someone like me? The cleaner's pause was telling. His next shots were wild, unprofessional. Fear had finally broken through his tactical discipline. Jack implemented his final sequence. Throughout the house, prepared charges blew out specific sections of wall, changing the tactical geography instantly. Alpha found himself suddenly exposed, his carefully chosen cover position now worthless. Contact team shifting to final engagement, Jack logged. Target contained. Everything had led to this moment. Every preparation, every hidden defense, every calculated response had channeled Alpha exactly where Jack wanted him. The cleaner was boxed in, his options exhausted, his professional composure shattered. Through his surveillance, Jack watched the external situation resolve. The containment team had the extraction force pinned down. Charlie was secured. All that remained was the final move against Alpha, the linchpin of Harrison's corrupt operation. Jack Morrison, retired Navy SEAL sniper, prepared to end this fight. His house had become exactly what he'd designed it to be, not just a defensive position, but a precision instrument for controlling and eliminating threats. The end game had begun. The final confrontation happened in Jack's living room, where it had all began. Alpha, his tactical options exhausted, made his last stand behind the overturned oak table. The cleaner's professionalism showed even in defeat. His position was solid, his fields of fire well chosen. But he was fighting on Jack's territory, against defenses prepared by someone who'd spent years perfecting this exact scenario. Terminal engagement initiated, Jack logged, implementing final containment protocol. Scout moved first, her silent approach drawing Alpha's attention for a crucial half-second. The cleaner's instincts were good. He didn't fall for the feint. Completely, maintaining his primary coverage, but that split focus was all Jack needed. Through his surveillance system, he watched Alpha's heat signature shift slightly, adjusting to cover both potential threats. The movement put him exactly where Jack had planned, in the convergence point of 3 different prepared positions. "You're good, Morrison," Alpha called out, his voice steady despite his situation. "Better than the file suggested. But you're forgetting something. I don't need to win. I just need to maintain position until your secondary extraction team arrives?" Jack's voice came through his house's speaker system. "The ones holding position 3 miles out? They've been contained. CIA tactical teams moved on them first." Alpha's surprise registered in his thermal signature, a slight tensing that told Jack everything. The cleaner hadn't known they'd identified his backup plan. "It's over," Dobson added, moving to his final position. "Harrison's been taken into custody. We have everything. The Santiago files, the black operations, the covered-up missions. Your entire operation is burned." Alpha's response was a burst of automatic fire, but his shots found empty air. Jack had already moved through his hidden routes, positioning himself for the final engagement. The cleaner had 1 magazine left. Jack had counted every shot, tracked every reload. "Last chance," Jack projected his voice, seemingly from everywhere at once. "Surrender now, or this ends exactly how you trained me to end it." The cleaner's laugh was harsh. "How I trained you? What are you—" His words cut off as recognition. Operation Kingfisher, the terminal phase instructor. "That was you?" "Lesson 1. Jack replied, moving silently into his final position. "Control the battlefield before the battle begins." Alpha's realization came too late. The cleaner started to turn, his weapon rising, but Jack had already executed his final move. Years of SEAL training, combined with intimate knowledge of his prepared kill house, made the outcome inevitable. 2 precise strikes, and Alpha's weapon clattered to the floor. The cleaner's resistance lasted exactly 3 seconds before superior position and training put him down, unconscious but alive. He would stand trial along with Director Harrison and everyone else involved in the corruption operation Santiago had uncovered. "Target neutralized," Jack logged. "All hostile elements contained." Through his external cameras, he watched the containment team secure the last of the extraction force. The storm was beginning to ease, the tactical situation resolving into its final phase. In his living room, Dobson emerged from cover, his tradecraft evident in how he maintained tactical awareness even in victory. "Eagle 6, this is Morrison," Jack transmitted on the secure frequency. "House is secured. Primary target in custody. Agency cleanup team requested for evidence collection and prisoner transport." Scout padded silently to his side as he began implementing his property's shutdown sequence. Throughout the house, hidden defenses powered down, surveillance systems shifted to standard coverage, and prepared positions reset to their concealed state. The German shepherd's ears twitched toward new sounds. Police sirens in the distance. Sheriff Cooper's people maintaining their perimeter would handle the official response. The CIA would clean up their own mess, leaving no trace of what had really happened here. Jack Morrison's isolated farm would go back to appearing ordinary, its deadly defenses hidden once again behind the facade of a simple retirement property. But something had changed. The corruption operation Santiago had uncovered was finally exposed, its architects facing justice. "Quite a night," Dobson commented, securing Alpha with professional efficiency. Jack allowed himself a small smile as he watched multiple agency vehicles approach through the diminishing storm. Just another quiet evening in the country. Dawn broke over Jack's farm, the storm's aftermath leaving a pristine blanket of snow that covered all signs of the night's violence. CIA cleanup teams worked with professional efficiency, removing every trace of the operation. To any observer, it would appear nothing unusual had happened at the isolated property. Sheriff Cooper supervised his deputies at the perimeter, maintaining the official story of a failed home invasion. The local police reports would show nothing more than an attempted break-in thwarted by an alert homeowner. Simple, clean, believable. "Agency's happy," Dobson reported, joining Jack on his porch. "Harrison's singing like a bird. Operation Santiago's files will finally see the light of day, through proper channels, of course." Jack watched Alpha being loaded into an unmarked vehicle, the cleaner's professional demeanor intact, even in custody. Charlie had already been transported, his cartel connections ensuring he'd face his own kind of justice. Scout padded silently beside him, her tactical alertness never wavering despite the diminishing threat. Like her master, she understood that. Vigilance was a constant state, not a temporary response. "Place won't be as quiet now," Cooper commented, climbing the porch steps. "Word gets out about how you handled 3 armed intruders. People might start wondering about their retired neighbor." Jack allowed himself a small smile. "People always wonder, Sheriff. The trick is giving them just enough to satisfy their curiosity without revealing the whole truth." By evening, Jack's farm had returned to its quiet solitude. The CIA teams were gone, the police had withdrawn, and even the signs of combat had been meticulously erased. Only the fresh snow showed any change, covering the land in clean white. Stillness. Inside, he moved through his house, resetting defensive systems and checking prepared positions. Each hidden feature returned to its concealed state, deadly capabilities masked behind ordinary appearances. The perfect cover, he reflected, wasn't just about hiding, it was about being exactly what people expected to see. Scout accompanied him on his final perimeter check, both of them maintaining their practiced vigilance. Some habits couldn't be broken, nor should they be. In a world where corruption could reach the highest levels, where threats could appear from unexpected directions, preparation wasn't paranoia. It was survival. "Back to our quiet life, girl," he told Scout as they completed their patrol. But they both knew the truth. Their peaceful retirement hadn't been compromised, it had been validated. Every preparation, every precaution, every carefully conceived defense had served its purpose. Jack Morrison, retired Navy SEAL sniper, would continue his simple farming life. But his house would remain ready, its defenses prepared, its secrets secure. After all, you never knew when the next storm might break.